Hi guys, Lord Sturm here. Welcome to day 2 of the first week of Theorycraft Weekly, brought to you by those of us Chicago Hearthstone fans. We don't really have I don't think we have a name yet, but we're working on it. What are we trying to create here? It's just a couple of us who are not necessarily pro players, but we want to create content more geared towards the average ladder goer. Those of us who just grind game after game after game on ranked and trying to get better and trying to improve our game and trying to see what kind of holes we can find in the ladder and exploit them to the best of our ability using as much tactical knowledge and willpower as we can. Now, what is the goal this week? This week we're going to be taking a look at the Priest class, a class that hasn't really been terribly notably on the ladder. It's not up there with, the Warrior, Druid, Warlock, sometimes Rogue, Mage of the ladder. Always up there with those top classes. But I think that it has a lot of potential. And I've been laddering with Priest a lot this week, and I want to show you guys the build I came up with. So let's dive in. I've been laddering with a few classes this season. I've been doing a lot of mid-range Hunter. Force of Nature Savage Road Druid is obviously one of my best decks. I play it a lot. That's what's gotten me to Legend mostly, is pretty fast Druid, or Ramp Druid sometimes. Tinker Sharp Sword Oil Rogue goes in and out of the ladder meta right now, but that if Priest does become a big thing, which it might, I think that Oil Rogue is the best counter to it. So keep that in mind while we're talking about this, when I start talking about matchups. Mid-range Paladin is in and out, in my opinion. We'll talk about this Warlock deck sometime soon. I really enjoy playing it, but not today. Today we're going to be talking about a deck that mostly I've taken from the pro player Gaara. He, of Tempo Storm. Fantastic pro player. And he's known for his shaman play, just due to his Twitter handle. But he's also a very prolific Priest player, and here he's created, I think, a really interesting take on what is called, quote-unquote, Chinese Priest build. If you're unfamiliar with what the Chinese Priest is, it is meant to be a contrast to the typical Control Priest. That used to be the build that many players like Amaz and RDU would run for a long time in tournament play. And what that revolved around was the package of Wild Pyromancer AoEs, as well as Akanai Soul Priest Circle of Healing AoEs. All of these combos that required two very specific pieces, and that made them very inconsistent in my opinion, and it made it kind of a tricky deck to ladder with. Now this Chinese Priest deck I think is way more fun to ladder with, and it's incredibly viable right now. Don't listen to what anyone says about Priest. This deck is good. You guys should check it out. Let me start by just talking about the curve of it. Now, the curve is going to look a little interesting, because Priest is usually thought of as a controlling class that wants to live to these big game balance, but this deck is not like that at all. This curve is very centered around the 1s and 3s, with a pretty decent ramp up into its top curve toppers. But those lower cost cards are what really are the bread and butter of this deck. So let's talk about them a little bit. Let's start with the minions. Minions are going to be what wins you every single game of Hearthstone, unless you're like Freeze Mage or something garbage. But we obviously have Northshire Cleric. Northshire Cleric is so necessary in any Priest deck worth its salt. That's going to be your draw engine, and it's going to work so well with some of our buff cards. Zombie Chow, in every matchup, I keep it. Every single one. Doesn't matter if I'm playing against a guy I know 100 times out of 100 plays Control Warrior, and I know 100 times out of 100 he's going to have a Fiery Wind Axe in his hand. I'm going to keep the Chow. I want to have it out. If he doesn't have the Wind Axe, then I get to bust his armor. If he does, then that's fine. I would rather him burn the Axe charge on a Chow than on a Cleric or something a little more valuable. But Zombie Chow turn 1 is so strong against any deck that's aggressive. Face Hunter, what does Face Hunter do if you play Zombie Chow turn 1? It kind of just quits. What does Zoo do? Well, Zoo has better options against a turn 1 Zombie Chow than Face Hunter, but it still has to... there's a pretty decent chance that you'll 2 for 1, especially if you're on the play. If you're on the coin, then you might be in a bit of trouble. But Giblin Stalker is an interesting choice, because not really many people play this card. It hasn't really taken off in a lot of decks. A 2/3 stealth for 2 is a pretty good deal. if you value the stealth, and this deck definitely does. In the aggressive matchups, you can just use it like a third Zombie Chow that costs 1 extra mana, which obviously isn't a great deal. But the benefit is the stealth is a big deal with our buffs, with our power word shields, and the meat of the deck. The card that makes Chinese Priest work is Velen's Chosen. +2, +4, spell damage +1. Amazing deal. So many of these low cards become serious threats once you give them that buff. You become a 3/7, 4/7, 4/7. This is what, a 5/6. Obviously, Shrinkmeister has way more utility than some of these other cards, and you wouldn't want him to be your turn 2 curve. But you can still buff him if you need to. This guy becomes a 5/8. That's insanity. That's so good. And the best part about the thing that makes having such a high health total so valuable for Priest is that you can hero power and keep everybody topped off. And not to mention that if you buff a Northshire Cleric, you can have him swing in and then heal him and draw a card. And that is such great value. Velen's Chosen is really what makes this deck run, and it is such an important card. But let's get into the mid-game curve, though. Dark Cultist is such a fantastic card. I run 2 of them because I've seen some people run 1 and then maybe like a Deathlord or something. I've had some bad experiences with Deathlord, so I have decided to shy away from that card for now. 2 Dark Cultists is fantastic. It's just such a meaty threat on the board. 3/4 for 3 is the best stats you can get at the 3-drop. That's not Deathlord. The Death Rattle is so good, and not to mention his voiceover is amazing. The dead stand ready. Dragonkin Sorcerer, though, is the real primary BRM addition to this deck. He just synergizes so well with your buffs. Basically, Dragonkin Sorcerer should be a Priest card. Kind of like the old Injured Blade Master, but I think Dragonkin Sorcerer is even better. He's a 4/6 with Power Word Shield, and he is a staggering 6/10 with the Velen's Chosen. 6/10 that you can have out turn 5. That is insane. Alright, that can just set you so far ahead, especially if you can combo with a Northshire. If you can ever cycle your Velen's Chosen like that, you're just gonna be miles ahead of your opponent. The staple card of Sludge Belcher. This is so important as your 5-drop versus aggro. Especially in a class where you can buff it. You can turn 5 Belcher, Coin, Powered Shield. You can do all sorts of things to make sure that people can't just bust your Belcher. And this card is so important in matchups like versus Face Hunter that I've actually decided sometimes to keep Sludge Belcher in my starting hand. Hear me out. This happened to me earlier today. I had a Belcher, I had a Zombie Chow, and then I had some 6-drop that I didn't want. So since I knew I had the early game in hand with Zombie Chow because it's such a strong card, and my curve is so low that I'm pretty sure I'm going to draw into other stuff, I decided to keep the Belcher, and the play worked out incredibly well for me. Vol'jin is one of those cards that's going to win you games versus the slower decks. He combos well with Holy Smite, and he combos well with Zombie Chow. Holy Smite, first of all, is just going to be great versus aggro by itself, and it combos with Vol'jin. That's the main reason why I keep this card one of in the deck, is because of how well it works with Vol'jin. And you'd love to trade your Vol'jin, like say they have Tarzan on the field, you just Vol'jin, Zombie Chow trades into it, and you're happy with your 6/5, and you're in a really great position. Vol'jin, he can just really, he's actually more, like in that case versus a Tarzan, he's really just a 1 mana less fire elemental, but you can always guarantee that one of your 2 attack minions will trade, and that's what's so valuable about Vol'jin. If there's one thing I would change about this deck is trying to find room for the 2nd Cabal Shadow Priest, because I love this card. And this card can swing so many matchups. You can pair it with Shrinkmeister and just get insane value. But even, like, this is my 6-drop of choice versus aggro, or versus mid-range hunter, or those Zulok decks. I love to be able to just steal. Like, stealing an Imp Gang Boss feels fantastic, let me tell you, in this new meta. Tharasen's a very strong card, and he can enable some crazy plays. I could see this being the 2nd Cabal, but I'm liking Tarzan right now. He's feeling pretty good to me. Oh god, I accidentally cut him. Tarzan's a very good card, and for the time being, I really don't see any mid-range lists that wouldn't run him. Kind of the same with Sylvanas. Sylvanas is an amazing card, and she works so well with your Shadow Word Death that you can just make some crazy plays happen. And that's why you run 2 Shadow Word Deaths in Priest, is because at the very least you'll use it to take out one of their big threats and then to combo with your own Sylvanas. And actually earlier I did Sylvanas, Shrinkmeister, Shadow Word Pain, my own Sylvanas. That's a funny play, let me tell you. But Sylvanas is a fantastic card. And Sylvanas even combos with Light Bomb. We haven't talked about the AoE package of this deck yet. But I'm only running 1 Holy Nova. I'm not running, like, any healing at all of the non-hero power nature other than 1 of Holy Nova. And the reason is, this is one of the other things that's key about the Chinese Priest, is not only the double Valence Chosen, but the double Light Bomb. And Light Bomb is one of the, I think it might be the best AoE card in the game. It's so strong. All the minions in this Priest deck, well, except for like Sylvanas, Tarzan, and Vol'jin most of the time, every other minion is going to have more health than it has attack. Oh, and Shrinkmeister as well. Yeah, every single one of our meaty mid-game minions has more health than attack, and so that means they'll survive Light Bomb. And their chances of surviving Light Bomb are even stronger if they're buffed with a Velens, because they get more health than attack, even though the spell damage +1 means you'll take 1 extra damage from their attack. Having a Valens buff on you means that you will most likely live through a Light Bomb. So the odds are your mid-game minions are going to live through this, especially if you're on top of your healing. And this is not one of the things that's cool about Light Bomb. This is one of the only cards that 1-for-1s with Dr. Boom, or has the potential to. It takes out Dr. Boom and the Boom bots, but then you have to worry about the Boom bot RNG, of course. But it is one of the cleanest ways to clean up a Dr. Boom ever invented, and that's what's so great about this card. It's just such a powerful AoE effect, and it can swing games really hard. What other cards did I miss? We will get to the top of the deck, though, in a little bit. Shrinkmeister, we talked about the combos. We might have talked about it in my other cut. Shrinkmeister works with Shadow Word Pain. It works with Shadow Madness, and it works with Cabal Shadow Priest. That's actually not as many combo pieces as I'd like for Shrinkmeister to work with, but even in a situation where you just drop him to trade in and then not take as much damage on your minions, that's value. As long as Shrinkmeister isn't your 2-drop on turn 2, you're in great shape. I like the 1 of Shadow Word Pain in the aggressive matchups. It obviously combos with Shrinkmeister. But it can clear out an Acolyte of Pain without triggering its card draw. It can just... It's really... Actually, a lot of times when I play turn 1 Zombie Chow, the response for Face Hunter is to coin a Knife Juggler and hope that I don't have a 2-drop. So one of the best counters to that play is just to have the Shadow Word Pain ready on turn 2. It's just a really powerful card in those vital early turns versus the aggressive decks. I'm running 1 of Thought Steal because it's going to be so important in slower matchups when you're stealing other people's big end-game threats. In my experience, what Thought Steal is versus like Control Warrior and versus other slow deck. Control Warrior is really the only super slow deck we see nowadays. What Thought Steal is to me in those matchups is draw 1 extra endgame threat and draw 1 extra removal option. So you draw like a Dr. Boom and an Execute, or something like that. And it can just swing games when you're taking your opponent's ammo for your own. Shadow Madness has so many applications in this meta. Versus Patron Warrior, where basically every minion in that deck is under 3 attack, or at least at the start, under 3 attack, except for like Tarzan, or if they're running Grom. And then you can get so much value out of that. I got 3 draws off of one play I did was I stole an Acolyte of Pain, healed it with a Cleric on the board, and I think it had a buff from a Taskmaster on it. So then I attacked and cleared another minion, and then I Holy Smited the Acolyte to get 3 draws off of it from my opponent. So you can do some crazy stuff with Shadow Madness. It enables some really cool plays, especially with Shrinkmeister. I didn't really talk about the one-up. I mean, we talked about how good Light Bomb is. Holy Nova is like your backup. It works really well with Felons, and it is good healing, and it combos with Northshire. I mean, Holy Nova's been around forever. We know how that one works. Did I miss anything? Oh, yes! One of the most important things is Chromaggus. After week 4, I was thinking of so many ways to implement this card into a deck, and this is one of my favorite ways, because the first deck that came to mind, we'll talk about this eventually, but Warlock came to mind first, because you can turn 9 Chromaggus, and then Morticoil something and get a draw, or get 2 draws. In this deck, you can do kind of the same. You can Chromaggus into Power Word Shield for 2 draws, or you can turn 10 Chromaggus into heal a minion for 2 draws. There are lots of actual really easy turn 1 applications for Chromaggus and Priest, and that's what I like so much about him. The best things you can draw 2 of is probably Sludge Belcher. It's just so hard to get rid of 2 Sludge Belchers. But I'm generally happy with duplicating anything at all in this deck. Like, just the card advantage that Chromaggus can provide, especially if he's left to go crazy, is insane. But I'm also very happy with the cases where I can just drop him and get 2 card draws immediately. And that's why he is my current endgame card of choice over something like Ysera. One thing to note about this deck, though, is that it actually dodges all the big game hunter options. Big game hunter is an annoyance, to say the least, and I'm very happy to help create decks that dodge that card, because it's so frustrating to deal with a big game hunter. If that like Dr. Boom is your only end game option, then getting it big game hunter is it just feels so bad, and I love dodging that. That's one of my favorite parts about deck building. So what I thought up here, though, is a couple of options you can come to think of with this deck if you were facing certain decks on the ladder. So, in the case of a faster metagame, one thing you might want to cycle in is a second Shadow Madness. A card you could probably drop for that is something on the higher end here. Like, probably Tarzan would be a cut if you're facing a lot of faster stuff, like Chromaggus and Tarzan. Another thing to note is, well, I'll get to it in a second. If you're facing a lot of Face Hunter, the best heal for Priest is Holy Fire. Obviously isn't very impactful otherwise, but finding room for Holy Fire, or I'm hesitant to say Light of the Nairu, because you're not running cards like Injured Blade Master that really easily get you the Light Warden. But Light of the Nairu is pretty useful to sneak out an extra heal versus those Face Hunters. This is basically like -1 charge on an Eagle Horn Bow in that matchup. Like I said earlier, I would love to find room for the second Cabal Shadow Priest. In aggressive matchups, this is one of my favorite curve toppers. I would consider cutting Tarzan or Sylvanas first, or Chromaggus for just a second Cabal. Or even like Light Bomb is pretty slow, so you might switch out the Light Bomb for a second Holy Nova. Another cut you want to make is if you're facing just all aggression all the time, like Face Hunter, like Zulok, you probably want to cut the Dragonkin Sorcerers and swap in Senjin Shield Masters. The taunt is so invaluable, and if they burn a silence on your Shield Master, then they're not burning it on your Sludge Belcher. And just dropping taunt after taunt is going to be really important in those super face matchups. And like I said before, there was a Death Lord in this deck, and that did make aggro easier, but I found it was just losing me games. Like, one of the worst feelings is when a Death Lord dies, and then they get a Tarzan for free, and you can't deal with it. But Death Lord will stop aggro in its tracks. It is a fantastic card for that, and you don't even mind it getting silenced. And finally, one of the cards I would consider putting in the same vein as Light of the Nairu, but I think a little bit better, would be Earthen Ring Farseer. When I was running Control Priest with Alkanai Soul Priest, Earthen Ring Farseer is a great play because it's turn 3 mini Fire Element. But I'm not choosing to run the Alkanai package because that would require just reshaping this entire deck, and that's not something I'm willing to do. But Earthen Ring Farseer still has its utility, and you can trigger a draw off of it, You can heal yourself and contribute to the board, which is so important, especially against those face decks. In a slower meta, first thing I would add in is a second Thought Steal. Thought Steal, like I said, is, in the words of Amaz, is stealing your opponent's best cards. It is so valuable, and in slower matchups, it is going to win you those games. And I just don't think I can really find room for two of them in this meta, especially when you see how stacked my 3-drops are. But that's something I would definitely try to find room for if you're facing a lot of slower decks. And now, one thing I almost spoiled earlier is the cardinal rule of playing... One of the cardinal rules of playing Priest is either... This Holy Smite is either a Holy Smite or it's a Ysera. Ysera always is a great card for Priest because you see it as high health value. It avoids Big Game Hunter. And if left uncontested, can spiral out of control way better than Chromaggus can. But, like I said, this is a pretty fast meta right now. Ysera is hard to find room for. But if I had to pick something else to top off this curve with, it would be Ysera. If you're facing less... If you want more guaranteed value than Ysera, Mind Control is going to be a one-of that you'll want to find room for. Mind Control, obviously, is in the same vein as Thought Steal. It's your opponent's best threat is now your best threat. Obviously, this is one of the most frustrating cards in Hearthstone, but we love it, and it's so powerful, and I honestly might consider even making room for it before I would make room for Ysera. People don't really play around Mind Control very much anymore. It's a powerful card. And if you're facing a lot of slower decks, it can win you games. And then the other card, of course, is going to be Mr. Boom. This is if you didn't want to care very much about the Big Game Hunter threats. Dr. Boom is a fantastic card. He's obviously the best 7-drop in the game. We're not running any actual 7-drops. So our turn 7 is a little sketchy. Usually it just involves like Sludge Belcher and Heal, or some combination of cards, like Dragonkin and Veilens on turn 7 is a strong play for us. But if you're just looking for if you're looking for something to just seal a game, Dr. Boom is the card. What would I cut for Dr. Boom? I don't even know. This deck is pretty well constructed right now. You could cut Chromaggus if you're not really feeling him very much. But I do love the potential he creates. Well then, yeah, those are the cards I'm thinking about. Let's take a look at matchups. So, for our Priest here, versus Patron Warrior, I want to call that matchup just about 50-50. What's really going to come down to is just establishing that board early and making him have to clear your threats constantly throughout the game. Just having strong drops all the time, getting your buffs, getting him to burn his executes on things that aren't really super valuable, like getting him to burn them on your Dragonkin Sorcerer instead of your Tarzan, or getting him to burn, you're letting your Chromaggus live. Like, if both of his executes are gone and Chromaggus is up, he's pretty much screwed in that matchup, because Patron Warrior doesn't run Shield Slam. In the Control Warrior matchup, you're going to want to play it a lot slower. You're going to want to rely on your Thought Steal is going to carry you really far, like I've said. You don't want to overflood the board because of the threat of Brawl. You just want to establish like 2 or 3 just mid-game threats and just push as much damage as you can with just a couple of threats at a time. There are lots of great... Versus Warrior, there are a lot of great Cabal targets. Acolyte of Pain, Armor Smith. Versus Patron, you've got Frothing Berserker. And you can Thought Steal stuff like Whirlwind and Junk, and you can just go ham. Basically, another way to win that matchup is just with card advantage with Thought Steal. If you can get a Northshire buffed enough that it just goes out of control and he can't deal with it. Vol'jin versus Grom is very strong if he hasn't killed you already. Sylvanas Shower Death doing all kinds of work. A lot of really standard priest stuff works in that matchup. Oh, I didn't mean to back up. Versus Shaman, this is basically your best matchup. I want to say the Warrior matchup, the Patron Warrior matchup is a 50-50, no more than 55-45 either way. Control Warrior matchup is probably going to be 55-45 Priest, maybe 60-40 Priest. I want to say that the Shaman matchup is 65-35 or 70-30 for Priest. Reason is just dealing with the Priest's threats for Shaman is just so annoying, especially with villains. Like, Earth Shock will just get rid of the villains. It won't really do any damage to your creature. And if they hex it, you're fine giving up that 2-for-1 mostly. You're going to have to rely on your, like, Holy Nova. If you're facing a lot of Shamans, you would probably switch out the Light Bomb for the second Holy Nova. Because it's just, Holy Nova is way better versus Shaman than Light Bomb. Because this clears totems. Totems don't have attack. Cabal, again, great Cabal targets. You want to get through those hexes and get through all the removal before you get to this endgame package. And you just, at the same time, you just want to be pushing as much damage as you can with your mid-game creatures, Dark Cultist, Dragonkin, Sludge Belcher, Fulgen, etc. Versus Rogue, this is your hardest matchup, like I alluded to earlier in the show. This is probably 65-35 Rogue. The reason being is Rogue's tempo gain is so insane that it is so hard to keep up. A lot of the game you're going to be just dropping one threat a turn. Like, say, Zombie Chow Giblin, Dark Cultist, Dragonkin, maybe Buff and Heal or Sludge or something. And the thing that Rogue is so good at doing is removing a threat while putting one on the board. And that's so hard for Priest to deal with because you need to have your threats stick for long enough to buff them. And if you can't do that, you're in a lot of trouble. And then the thing is, Rogue is just going to get a prep sprint. And like that, the card advantage they may have lost from getting all that tempo is right back in their hands. And then they have all day to Deadly Poison, Tinker's Sharp Sword Rail, Tinker's Sharp Sword Rail, Swing, Blade Flurry. It's really, I think, the most unwinnable matchup for either the most or the second most unwinnable matchup for this deck. So if you're seeing a lot of Rogues on the ladder, stay away from... I would say stay away from Priest in general, but this deck especially has trouble with it. Mid-range Paladin, 50-50 or 55-45 Priest. I can't decide which. You have a lot of good ways to just keep totems off the board with your early game. And you get, like, a turn 1 Northshire is so strong for, like, this is one of the only matchups where you'll just drop Northshire turn 1 and be like, what are you going to do about it? There's not really much. Thinking other than that, Light Bomb is one of the best ways to deal with Quartermaster dudes, if unfortunately you get that far. Don't forget about Velen's spell damage, because that combos with Holy Nova to clear +2/+2 tokens. Plenty of Cabal Shadow Priest targets. You can get lots of value out of all of your cards in this matchup, and that's what I like about it. Don't forget you'll just always Thoughtsteel Tyrion. Hunter, Face Hunter, great matchup. 60-40 Priest or 65-35. Like I said, your curve is just so low, and you can just keep yourself healed. You're not going to die to hero powers thanks to your hero power. You're just going to stay alive all the time. I think that this is one of your best matchups, even without the Death Lord that I cut. Druid, 50-50. I'm not going to call it either way. If anything, it's 55-45 Druid. The trick is going to be dealing with their stuff, because they have a lot of, like, Druid of the Claw is actually very hard for this deck to deal with. You're going to have to rely on the fact that they work like you, but you work a little bit faster in your tempo. So, dropping these cards turn 1, like again, against Paladin I would do this every day, but sometimes I like to drop the Northshire turn 1 versus Druid because that forces them not to Wild Growth. Zombie Chow and Northshire put pressure on them for trying to skip mana. And Velen's Chosen is one of the best cards for evening out that advantage, I think. If you can sneak it out, and you can actually use that to clear off things like a Druid of the Claw. Very surprisingly effectively. And they do have Keeper of the Grove as the silence option, which puts them in a better position than a lot of other classes to deal with your buffs. But you can take advantage of that on your turn while you can. Other than that, you need to just have, like, Sludge Belcher is going to be one of those cards you need to time and impeccably if you're behind to try and find a way around the combo. Oh, I didn't mean back out again. I stink at this game. Warlock. Zoolock, you're going to do great. Zoolock and Demon Lock, I think this is 60-40. Or 55-45 Priest. Probably closer to 55-45. I don't like to call many things much more than 60-40. You can deal with their early game package really well. Velen's Chosen actually deals with hatched Nerubians, which is surprising, because if you had told me that Priest had a good way to deal with hatched Nerubians before GVG, I would have kind of rolled my eyes if it wasn't just luckily having Akanai Circle. Yeah, it's just going to be all about that curve versus Zoo. Shadow or Death is going to work miles against Doomguard. You can Sylvanas Shadow or Death to steal the Doomguard, which always feels good. AoE is going to matter a lot. Light Bomb is going to do plenty of work. Not much else to say. I think that you just win this. Like, another great matchup with a lot of great Cabal and Shadow Madness targets. And those cards will win you games. Handlock, however, is probably 60-40 Handlock, or 65-35. Like, I'm not afraid to call it that. That's a tough matchup if you're playing against a strict Handlock player. Like, think with things like Drakes, with things like Drakes into Shadow Flames and all that stuff. That's a matchup that is just so hard to win. Especially if they're still running things like Jaraxxus. You don't have the tools to deal with Jaraxxus as a priest. Light Bomb will keep you alive versus Giants and the like. This is one of the cards that, since we're running two of them, it will steal you games in this very difficult matchup. Other than that, if you can get your buffs out before he gets too far ahead on the board, while you're still clinging to the board, you can get into a position to win. But it's just going to be hard to seal out the game without also playing in front of the Molten Giant plays that can come up. Mage. Mech Mage you're going to body, but I haven't seen Mech Mage in forever. So let's talk about the new Tempo Mage. I think is going to be 50-50. It's a tricky matchup. You just have to really be in a good position to answer Flamewakers if they come down turn 3. Other than that, I think you can easily win it. There are some good swing plays that deck can do, though, with Flamewaker, Sorcerer's Apprentice, cards like that. You just have to be very wary. And if you can establish your board and stay ahead of them step by step by step, I think you're in a good shape. That could be in the Priest's advantage, but I need to spend more time with it. Freeze Mage, you're not really going to win. Like, it's hard matchup for Priest to win. We're not running any silences. We don't have a way around Ice Block. If you're running into Freeze Mage, you want to find room for Kizan Mystic in this deck. You would probably just take out the Shadow Madness for it. But the way to win that matchup is to curve, like I've said. Zombie Chow into Giblin, into Dark Cultist, into Dragonkin, into Villains and stuff. If you're playing stuff every turn and swinging as much as you can while you're not frozen, you're in great shape. And that is the best way to win it. I almost won that matchup today. Almost. That's probably this deck's hardest matchup. Those are the three. Freeze Mage, Handlock, Oil Rogue. And what was the last deck? It was the Mirror Match. Okay, well, that's whatever it is. Can't really talk much about it. I think that this deck does beat the Control Priest. But in the Mirror matchup, you're just going to want to watch out for making sure they don't get too far ahead with Northshire draws. You're going to want to get as much value out of Shed Madness as you can. Really, you just have to outplay your opponent. That's kind of the way Mirror matchups go. And try to be as greedy as possible with your draw engines. I think that's the way to win the Mirror. Anyway, that's my look at this Gaara's Chinese Priest deck. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Be on the lookout for some more videos this week as we head into our podcast on Friday, where we'll be talking all things Priest. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I'll see you next time.